Economic Advisory Commission needs to make certain findings for the record to evidence our compliance with all applicable laws. As a preliminary matter, FOIA requires us to ascertain the general location of each member participating remotely. I would ask that each EAC member note your general location in the chat box or send that information to Vance Zabella at vance.zabella@fairfaxcounty.gov. You can use your, in terms of your location, you can use your magisterial district or your general location like Oakland, Weston, McLean, to indicate where you're watching from. So in addition, if you cannot adequately hear another member, please also so note that matter in the chat box so that the issue can be addressed. There will be 2 motions. When the time comes to vote on each motion, just unmute yourself and vote either yes, no, or abstain based on what vote Supervisor Stork is calling for. We can all vote at the same time. We don't have to go through it individually. So let me pass the virtual gavel to Vice Chairman Stork so that I will make the following motions. I move that the Economic Advisory Commission certify that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this commission and the public to physically attend this meeting in person, and the usual procedures cannot be implemented safely or practically. As a result, I further move that the Economic Advisory Commission conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated video and audio conferencing line, and that the public may access this meeting by calling 602-333-0032 and entering access code 167352. So moved.
And I'll go ahead and second that motion. And all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, finally, I move that the Economic Advisory Commission certify that the matters on its agenda today relate to the COVID-19 emergency itself, are necessary for continuity in Fairfax County government, and or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of the Commission's lawful business, lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. So moved.
And I will second that motion. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You can hand back the virtual. Yeah, thank you. So I'm glad we can be together, even if it is virtually. As we all know, COVID-19 has impacted most aspects of our lives. As a result of the virus, Fairfax County government has taken many unprecedented actions, from the health department working harder than ever to protect the health of our residents, to the human services department making extraordinary efforts to support our most vulnerable neighbors with food and housing assistance. It has been an all hands on deck at Fairfax County. The Board of Supervisors is also very committed to helping our business community, help it survive this virus. As you all know, the virus has had a severe impact on our local economy, and the board has taken several unprecedented actions, including creation of the Fairfax Rise program, grant program, which the board funded with $45 million to ensure that 100% of eligible applicants received a grant. We made thousands of grants to businesses with fewer than 50 employees, and the board is especially pleased with the large number of minority, woman, and veteran-owned businesses we were able to assist. So as we work to help our small business survive, we also recognize that there will be much to do to recreate and expand upon the vibrant economy we had going into this virus. So today we will discuss the ongoing efforts of the Economic Development Authority and the county to develop an action plan to recover from the impacts of the virus and to grow our economy. Some of you may have already been asked for input by the consultant who is assisting with preparation of the action plan. Today, we will have a presentation on the status of plan preparation, and then all EAC members will have an opportunity to provide input and suggestions on what the action plan needs to address and include. We'll also have a presentation on why we need action specifically directed to the extremely hard-hit industries in the hospitality sector. Finally, as many of you will recall, the EAC has been active in the county's efforts to advance autonomous vehicles as a mode of transportation and as a potential new industry to establish and grow in the county. There have been recent developments with our efforts at the Mosaic Demonstration Project, and EAC members will be brought up to speed. As always, we want your input because of possible confusion with so many participants online. We will hold questions and comments till the end of each presentation. You may, in the interim, submit a question via the chat function. But when we get to question and answer, if you could raise your hand via the Zoom function, and if anybody needs instructions on that, let us know and someone will help us. I'm not an expert. But anyway, we'll have someone watching for the hands being raised and watching the chat box, and they will pass along those questions for us. So before we get started with our first presentation, I would like to ask Chairman Jeff McKay, who has been working very hard over the past several months to help lead the county through this unprecedented challenge. And I would ask Chairman McKay if he would like to make some opening remarks. And he may not be with us yet. We'll catch up with Jeff when he joins us. But in the interim, we sent out a copy of the minutes from our last meeting. If no one has any changes or revisions, those minutes will stand as a record of that meeting. Were there any changes? Therefore, hearing none, we will treat them as a record of our last meeting. So we'll now discuss the ongoing efforts to develop the Economic Recovery Framework and Action Plan. This is a joint effort of the county and the county's Economic Development Authority. The consultant selected to assist with this effort is HRNA Advisors. Olivia Moss and Jeff Hebert from HRNA will summarize the stakeholder outreach and input that has occurred, and then each EAC member will be asked, and then the EAC members will be asked for their input and suggestions. Hopefully we have Olivia or Jeff on the line.
Can I just jump in really quick? I think that Chairman McKay should be unmuted. Chairman McKay, if you're there and you can hear us, if we want to.
I am.
I've never had Chairman McKay muted before. Welcome.
I want to find out who was responsible for that, right?
Right.
No, I just want to say good morning to everyone. I can see on my screen a lot of talent who's joined us, and I want to reinforce John's comments about how proud we are of this team, of the county's response, of our business community's response during these unprecedented times. And as I tell folks everywhere I go, our recovery is going to be a marathon and not a sprint. And so what we're hearing today in our presentations are really important for us to hear, not only to have a plan for our economic recovery and one that we can all embrace, but also to look at some industries that have been particularly hard hit, and certainly the hospitality industry is one of those. I'm very happy that next week our board will be considering expanding the emergency ordinance for restaurants and allowing more flexibility for outdoor dining, especially provisions for when the weather turns here, which we know it's going to very soon. I've also begun conversations with our General Assembly leaders at looking at expanding the time by which emergency ordinances can be in place after an emergency has passed, because we know that our restaurants, our hospitality industry, and our businesses are going to need a longer period of time to recover. And so very proud of everything we've already done. John mentioned our RISE grant program, and it is unprecedented. I think the thing that people don't know about it, which is pretty amazing, is that 83% of organizations and businesses that have gotten grants have between 1 and 10 employees. And so I think that helps emphasize the importance to all of us of maintaining our small businesses that need the help the most. Obviously, we want to help all of our businesses get through tough times, but those small businesses in particular are ones that I know we're all very concerned about as we move forward. And so I feel good about where we are, but I do know that it's going to take everyone on this call, our team, to be able to help us get through these very difficult times as we move forward. I want to thank John for his leadership and Supervisor Stork for their work on the Economic Advisory Commission. You know, I can remember when we restood this group up, and it was well before the COVID pandemic, but if there was ever a time for us to focus on our economic recovery, it's now. And on a positive note, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I can think of few places across the country and world that are better prepared to be able to respond in a very positive way to these challenging times like we're going to be able to in Fairfax County. We have the talent, we have the infrastructure, we have the assets, we have the people, and we have a good business environment already under our belts in which we can build on to help with the recovery. I'm most interested in the recovery framework presentation because we know as a county board that we're not going to fix this problem with what we've already done. We're not going to fix it in the next 2 to 3 weeks or 2 to 3 months, that this is going to be a multi-year effort to rebuild our economy here. And we know that in order to provide the vital services that we need to our residents, we have to have a strong business community and a strong economy. And so I look forward to the presentations today. And as always, I see a lot of friends on this call. I tell everyone, if we're missing something, if you think there's something else we should be doing from a county standpoint, please make sure we know that. We don't have all the answers, but I can tell you this, we have all the energy in the world to respond to any challenge that's out there. So thanks for letting me say a few words, John, and let me turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for your great leadership through this, as we say, unprecedented situation that we're dealing with, and we're going to do well with it. So, Rebecca, do we have Olivia or Jeff on the line, and can we commence with their presentation?
Yes, Olivia and Jeff are ready to go. I first am going to ask my colleague to quickly flash up the slide that shows how to raise your hand in Zoom, just to make sure everyone knows where to go, so we can follow that process. So again, please keep your microphone muted unless you're called on to speak. And this is how you raise your hand. You go to participants, click on participants, you will see that little pop-up come up, and there you'll see your little blue hand. You can raise your hand. I'll be kind of helping to track when hands are raised, so we can help Supervisor Faust call on you. When you're called on, unmute yourself, and then after you ask your question or make your comment, if you could then please lower your hand. The other piece here is to please ensure that your full name is listed, and you go ahead and do that by click on your name in the video and just or change it from the participant list.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I was remiss in not thanking Rebecca and her team for putting this together. It's not easy, and you guys did a great job, so thank you.
Our pleasure. Okay, so I think Olivia and Jeff, if we are ready for you to go.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, everyone. thanks to the chair and other members of the commission for inviting us to speak this morning about the effort that you are undertaking. My name is Jeff Hebert. I'm a partner in charge of this project in our New York office. And with me is Olivia Moss, who is the project manager for this project. We are a 40-year-old firm, economic, public policy, real estate analysis. We have offices across the country. And on this project, our team from New York and DC are leading this project. Our DC office has long-term engagements in Northern Virginia and in the DC area. And so we're very happy today to present to you at least this picture of where we are today. Next slide, Olivia. So just to start, I thought it was important just to go over the scope of work and sort of where we are as it stands today. As you talked about a minute ago, we're supporting you, the county and the EDA, to develop a recovery strategy in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. This strategy will guide the county through stabilization and outline recommendations for fostering an equitable and inclusive recovery. Our scope is broken down into 3 tasks, and we've been working really well with your team at the county and the EDA on this. Task 1 is a needs assessment and working recovery framework, which consists of the existing conditions review and stakeholder engagement, which is ongoing. Second is the working recovery framework production, which is upcoming as we finish out the engagement and some of our background research. Task 2 is the economic impact of COVID-19 assessment. We started with the pre-COVID-19 landscape assessment of the economy, which is now completed. But we are actively working right now on forward-looking scenario development and economic impact analysis overall of what has happened to the economy and what projections we may look forward to in a few different scenarios for you. And then the third and final task is the recovery strategy itself and program recommendations coming from that strategy. And that's where we will work with the county team to think through, based on what we've seen as pre-COVID activity, what we are projecting will happen or is a potentiality to happen in the recovery, what are the strategies that the county should think about taking, and what program recommendations come from that. And that's really the meat of the end of our work that we will leave with you. Next slide.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, good morning, everyone. We're glad to be with you. As Jeff mentioned, I'm Olivia Moss. So as Jeff mentioned, we're starting with a round of stakeholder engagement and a needs assessment that will combine desktop analytical work as well as outreach that we're conducting through a series of virtual roundtables, as well as issuing a questionnaire for stakeholders who are not able to participate in those roundtables to provide their input. So far, we've talked to stakeholders from 35 different departments and organizations, including county officials and county department representatives, civic leaders, county and nonprofit and independent health service providers, representatives of major employers and small businesses and small business leaders, small business support organizations and minority chambers, and representatives of institutions of higher education in Fairfax County. And I'll go through a set of slides now that summarize some of the initial feedback that we're hearing from these groups, which is critical when married with our existing conditions analysis and COVID impact analysis in helping to define the county's needs for a strong and equitable economic recovery, and will inform our recommendations as we move forward. One of the first things we noticed as we looked at socioeconomic analysis and analysis of where COVID-19 cases were greatest per 100,000 residents was that there is an alignment in the concentration of vulnerable households, low-income households, those without access to car to reach their places of employment or internet, represented here as median household income and percent of population of color, and a high instance of COVID cases per 100,000 residents. So you see this in both the east and west sides of the county, as well as in areas around Bailey's Crossing and Annandale. As we spoke to county officials and civic leaders, they reflected a similar pattern, that there have been disproportionate impacts on Latinx, Hispanic, and immigrant communities throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, both in terms of health, but also in terms of the economic crisis, in part due to many of these individuals' employments in essential industries. That there are, a new wave of residents and households who were struggling prior to the pandemic, but now a wave of newly vulnerable households emerging. That households are facing challenges accessing basic tools needed to participate in the economy at a time of social distancing, including access to the internet and basic digital literacy skills. And that the industries that employ many of these individuals, tourism and restaurant industries, were hit particularly hard relative to other sectors. They offered opportunities for recovery by targeting resources toward the hardest hit industries, and really stressed that this is key, since there are industries that have weathered the pandemic differently and may, either have experienced more stability or be thriving. And they suggested continuing to invest in programs that support economic mobility and improve residents' lives, and the potential for all residents and workers to participate in Fairfax County's economic success, including job training, continuing education, disability support. County and nonprofit health service providers reflected similar trends and observations, including that the pandemic has strained their capacity to service those most in need in terms of both funding, but also in terms of their staff, some of whom are the hardest hit. They are concerned about their ability to raise funds to sustain an increased level of service and activity in the coming year as recovery funding runs out, and there may be a drop in giving. And they noted that the virtual economy has made providing services more challenging, but in some ways has also spurred opportunities for collaboration and connection between private and public sector service providers. They recommended and asked that as part of the economic recovery framework, we consider health impacts that arise from the work of various county departments and coordinate planning across departments. This is really about the potential to redefine how we talk about health and what health might mean when you talk about it from a perspective of urban planning to public health provision. Streamlining services where possible and adopting strategies that enhance the efficiency of service provision. Similar to the previous point, thinking about, where a resident goes for information about physical health services, mental health services, economic opportunities, provision of services for their families at a time of social distancing, and where they are trying to access all of this online, ensuring that they know where to find those services and that they can do so in a streamlined manner. And then providing funding that offers greater time frame flexibility and less cumbersome reporting requirements that both would allow organizations to deliver programs and support more quickly, as well as build more sustainable support. A number of the organizations we spoke with talked about, the pressure of spending funding either by the end of this year or being able to report on specific types of funding, and a concern about not being able to use that funding over a longer time frame of a sustained increased level of service. We next looked at the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on industries, and this is just one small snapshot of what we are looking at here. As Jeff mentioned, this will also feed into and inform our economic impact analysis going forward. But we started by looking at, which industries and which occupations have been the hardest hit. This is a snapshot of initial unemployment claims by occupation throughout Northern Virginia, the workforce area for which this information is available from the Virginia Employment Commission. And I would note that, about 25%, a quarter of these claims are in the occupation categories with the lowest median hourly earnings. So food preparation and serving related occupations and personal care and service occupations with an average median earning of about $12.30 an hour. I'm sorry, a median hourly earning of $12.30 an hour. This reflects some of those industries that we've heard are also hardest hit, as well as some of the more vulnerable populations who work within those industries. Major employers and those who represented large-scale industries in the county indicated that some industries are truly in crisis, while others have fared relatively well, like professional services firms. They are holding off on making major decisions about real estate space needs and upgrades until there is more certainty about what the future will look like for their industries. And there's a stunning liquidity that recovery will vary across industries. They are concerned about how some industries will recover quickly and some will continue to suffer. They suggest and recommend establishing messaging around reopening employment centers to rebuild consumer confidence. So rolling out consistent messaging about return to work and a safe return to work to encourage people to begin interacting with those employment centers and areas on which some particularly service economy businesses require activity, to create a universal solution that eliminates the need for filing individual property valuation appeals in 2021. We heard a good deal about concern about adjustment to property valuations and taxes, related, I think, clearly to the need to hold off on decisions around real estate space. Doubling down on investment in tourism and leisure travel, so promoting, again, ways to travel and interact with the county's tourism industry safely. Increasing the efficiency of the permitting process and eliminating unknowns that all industries, or for industries that are adapting their physical spaces. There was particularly concern about, the ability to make changes to physical space and the ability to operate safely, and ensuring that there was an efficient and quick permitting process to work their way through those processes. And then continuing to prioritize business attraction and retention, ensuring that Fairfax County doesn't fully lose the momentum and the opportunity to continue presenting itself as a great economic opportunity, offering a high quality of life for workers, and making sure that as you move toward recovery, you're continuing to spread that message and position the county to continue to attract and retain existing businesses. Small businesses and business support organizations shared some of these impacts and takeaways. They again stressed that securing adequate and sustainable funding has been an ongoing challenge. They were also concerned about consumer confidence, feeling that it may be stifling patronage, specifically of local and minority-owned businesses. Like many of the service providers we spoke to, they noted that they have really shifted to survival mode and are concerned about their ability to continue operating over the long term. They also noted that their customer base includes many of those in the hardest hit industries. And they are really feeling ripple effects up and down the supply chain as restaurants and hotels struggle. This was particularly true for food service providers, breweries, and others, a large portion of whose business is also dependent on these other service providers. In terms of their interaction with their workforce, a lack of childcare support has been restricting the available workforce, making it hard to manage day-to-day staffing and the availability of staff. They struggle with talent attraction and development, and as mentioned, day-to-day staffing, based on the uncertainty of the pandemic and their ability to provide certain guidance to their employees around when and how they will be operating. They recommend putting together safety guidelines that offer clarity both on workplace safety as well as building consumer confidence, that reaching out to businesses with unified messaging and providing a one-stop shop for resources, something that the county and the EDA have actively been working on already, would be meaningful to these businesses. And this may really be about making sure that there is adequate outreach and adequate messaging to ensure that the county and EDA's resources are the resources that these businesses can access and trust. Streamlining online permitting, similar to the major employers we talked to ensure that delays don't stand in the way of businesses making necessary changes to reopen safely and can assure particularly their workers, but also customers, that they are safely reopening. And they noted advocating for rent deferment or arranging some other deals between landlords and small business owners. As we heard, in terms of property taxes from some of the major employers, there is a concern about ongoing operating expenses and the ability for small businesses, large businesses, and nonprofit service providers we talk to be able to sustain the significant ongoing expenses and uncertainty that comes along with operating within the pandemic without some additional support and certain funding. And with that, I will turn it back to Jeff to talk about our higher education outreach.
So the next sort of group of stakeholders we looked at was impacts on higher education with GMU and Nova Community College. And I'm sure, as you already know, community colleges and public institutions are facing widespread budget cuts across the country. And in particular in Northern Virginia, which would reduce their capacity to serve the students most in need and continue offering the many public benefits that the educational institutions provide both to the local community and the local economy. Just three quick things here. We know that the higher earnings and reduced need for social services among community college graduates saves about $46.4 billion a year in government spending. Community college job training programs substantially increase participants' earnings over time, which accrues to tax base. And the power to grow together between GMU and Nova to support the region is fundamental to the growth of the Northern Virginia economy. And that is something true not just in Northern Virginia and Fairfax County, but across the country, the impact of educational institutions on the economy. Next slide. So here are some of the things that we've heard from our conversations with higher ed. The first, which I think is really interesting and important to stability, is that the pandemic has resulted in more last-minute decisions from students impacting school enrollment, meaning enrollment has been somewhat unpredictable. What we heard is that prospective students are waiting until the very last minute to make decisions on whether or not they will attend, which is making enrollment projections and other sorts of accommodations for those students unpredictable and somewhat chaotic in the situation that we find ourselves. The second, which I'm sure is no surprise to many of you, is that there's uncertainty around sufficient funding from the Commonwealth. As you know, there's been a severe economic impact on the Commonwealth itself, and how that will then roll down to NOVA and GMU is something that is of great concern. Many students don't have the necessary resources to learn remotely and online, whether it be access to a laptop itself, or access to Wi-Fi, or appropriate room in a home or an apartment to be able to study. Next, sort of on the landscape of higher education itself and their facilities, schools are beginning to reevaluate how they use institutional real estate. As you can imagine, the pandemic, work from home, school from home, has caused academic institutions around the country to reevaluate their use of space and what is necessary to be on campus for, and what may not be necessary in the future. And that may cause some transition in the real estate that these institutions hold. Curriculums will likely shift to focus on retraining and re-education for a wave of new jobs. One of the things we're looking at is what jobs were in existence before COVID, what jobs are likely to come back based on historical precedent, and what types of retraining or re-education needs to happen for those who may be entering a different sector of the workforce coming out of this. So what does that mean for these educational institutions? They want to advocate for and become a partner in addressing the digital divide around broadband access and those sorts of things. They want to support new workforce training, upskilling, and reskilling that offers creative solutions to the potential shift in job opportunities that may occur with the recovery. They want to build on healthy competition with other Northern Virginia EDAs and build partnerships that strengthen the brand of the institutions through much of the work that they do across education and research. Of course, in looking at the economic climate of the Commonwealth, they want to advocate at the state level to ensure each institution receives enough funds to sustain support for their student populations, and thereby continuing to support the Fairfax economy. So with that, here are some preliminary takeaways from the stakeholder engagement. The first is, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Fairfax County's economy was thriving. However, what we know is that not all residents had the opportunity to participate in the success and reap the benefits of the economy as it existed pre-COVID. Recovery requires a sector-specific approach to ensure support is highly targeted to the unique needs of each industry. Certain workforce supports transcend industry lines. As Olivia said before in one of the earlier slides, childcare is important across the board. There are other crucial support resources that can sustain and support the workforce, particularly as we look at this sort of, I would say, unusual, protracted emergency situation that we find ourselves in. Stakeholders are looking to the county to support economic recovery by optimizing their internal processes, mentioned before about permitting, and building back consumer confidence. The county being able to take a leadership role in doing the things necessary to restore confidence, consumer confidence. Finally, in the long term, an equitable recovery should build towards a new normal that uses this moment as an opportunity to address existing disparities in the county. One of the things that we found, and earlier in the slides, in the maps, you can see there were existing disparities in the county. We believe there will be additional disparities because of the uneven impact on certain sectors of the economy, which means we will have to think about a new normal that addresses both those existing disparities and those that we are seeing resulting from the impacts on specific sectors, which is why we're taking a sector-based approach, and why some of the language that you saw earlier was talking about reskilling and retraining, because we think that that is potentially going to be very important in the recovery of your constituents. So that leads directly to some recovery precedents that we wanted to leave you with that are focused on sector-specific plans and workforce support. One of the things that that has happened in New York City and has happened other parts of the country is permanently extending outdoor dining year-round and loosening restrictions for the winter months, which is important, of course, in New York and in a lot of places in the country. A growing number of cities have capped food service delivery fees at 15% to support local restaurants and the percentage that the local restaurants take home. The city of Austin awarded almost $1 million to support child care providers and passed the Save Austin's Vital Economic Sectors Act to identify more funds to make sure that employment could be stabilized by the provision of child care services. Louisiana published the Early Childhood Strong Start Framework with guidelines for classroom operations, family engagement, and more in looking at the slow return of students to class. The Maryland DOE published the Recovery Plan for Child Care, identifying a series of strategies for supporting service providers. And although many of these examples are at the state level, just sort of this thinking about what the county could provide and what the county could think about to support a recovery, we think is important just to start to have conversation. On process optimization and consumer confidence, Arlington County requested partial year financial information 4 months early to prepare for drastic changes in the 2021 property valuations. Counties across the country have expanded their permitting capacity by allowing virtual building inspections. The United Kingdom has developed a return to the office marketing campaign to highlight the social and productive benefits of working in an office even at reduced capacity. The city of Tulsa launched a recruitment initiative aimed at attracting new talent to the city. The program provides grants to remote workers for moving to the city and engaging with the community, given the fact that there are some companies who are going primarily remote, and the attraction to be able to live in a place of choice. And then the last example is counties in upstate New York are exploring partnerships with providers for around camping to expand outdoor accommodations for tourists. The types of things that many counties across the country are doing to stabilize their economy in this sort of new environment that we're in, even if this environment itself lasts only for a couple of years. And then finally, just to address where we are today and the work that the county is doing, you are joining a number of communities across the country who are really at the forefront of thinking about what an equitable recovery, a recovery from COVID looks like. Just some examples: Newark, New Jersey, Seattle, and others are starting to look at how do we deal with the issues that existed before COVID-19? How do we look at what's currently happening with COVID-19, and how do we design a recovery strategy that really addresses those issues that were existing before, looks at where we are today, and plans for a better future of the economy. We think that's very important for the overall stability and success of Fairfax County moving forward. So finally, our next steps with you are to complete stakeholder outreach and engagement, which has been underway for a few weeks now. As I said before, we'll be developing the working recovery framework with the county and EDA team. We will be conducting the impact analysis and start to identify recovery scenarios. And finally, we will develop the report, including the strategy and program recommendations to be delivered to the county. So with that, that's our presentation. Thank you very much for the time. And Rebecca, I think we go to Q&A, or Mr. Faust. I'm not sure where we are on the agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff, and Olivia as well. We really appreciate your efforts on our behalf. As you were speaking, some really good suggestions came in through the chat, and we're going to capture every single one of those and share them with you. And we're now going to open it up to questions. Is that right, Rebecca? And you, I think, are checking to see who has their hand up. And we'll do this for, depending on how it goes, at least 10 minutes. But any question that shows up in the chat will get a response. It'll be after, it may not be during the meeting, but we'll definitely get a response out for every question that we have. Rebecca?
So I do see a hand up. I'm just going to quickly respond to some questions that came through the chat, just to let some folks know about where we are on some of this. And Chase right now is sharing again, if you do have a question, how to raise your hand, just so everyone has a chance to do that. So there were a lot of good suggestions for engagement. One thing I want to know is that as part of our roundtable discussions and our engagement, we as staff reached out to different organizations to take feedback and presented that to HRNA. And we also have a survey out right now, and which is provides another way to provide direct feedback on impacts and needs and opportunities for solutions. So we have those out now. We are hoping to get those back this week. But if you, so we wrote down, we're writing down who you're suggesting should be involved, which is great. But if you have other suggestions, if you could email those to Etta Nahapetian on our team, who's coordinating this. And Etta, if you could put your email in the chat, just so everyone has that. So from there, I see that Clayton, you have your hand up if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a really good effort here from the consultants on this report. I actually just have a question for the county in considering adopting some permanent standards for things like outdoor dining and outdoor shopping for the winter months and maybe beyond. What's been the experience of the county so far? Have you had problems in implementing that over the last few months? And similarly, with a lot of businesses needing to adapt their spaces for physical distancing and whatnot, had that required a lot of permitting work on the county's part, or has that all been done mainly just by taping the floor and moving desks around? Or how much has the county had to participate in that?
That sounds like it would be a question for Barbara Byron if she's on the call, and I knew she was.
Thank you, Mr.
All
Chair.
roads lead back eventually to Barbara Byron.
Thank you. I think. Anyway, I'm Barbara Byron from the Department of Planning and Development, and Clayton, thank you for the question. So I think, as many people know, in July of this year, we held a public hearing and allowed restaurants to expand outside, actually without any kind of permitting from us, except if they were putting up a larger tent. In that, we were more lenient, I think, than any other of the jurisdictions around that I've been able to understand how they've approached it. Most of them required permits. So as we were going into the winter months, we obviously saw that COVID was not ending, and we have advertised an amendment to our ordinance that is going to come to the board at its next meeting as a public hearing. And in that, we make it clear that you can have sides on your tents and you can have heaters in your tents. We are not requiring permits, just as we didn't before, except that the tents are larger singularly or collectively than 900 square feet. They do need to get a permit from our fire marshal. The fire marshal fee is waived for this, so we're not requiring a fee, but they are required to do it. And the tents and the heaters obviously need to be rated as appropriate for the use and flame retardant if they're larger. So I only know, so it has not created a lot of permitting problems for us. It's been actually very straightforward. I only know of one instance where there's been a problem, and it was the fact that people, because it was more restrictive in other jurisdictions, some people were coming to party at one particular location, which has caused some problems. But other than that, I haven't heard of any particular problems with our ordinance. The chairman alluded to the fact that, unfortunately, because of the way the state code or the state emergency executive order is formulated, this can only be in effect for 6 months after the end of the pandemic, after the end of the emergency is declared. And so our hands are tied a little bit by that, but I think I heard the chairman say in his remarks that he's talking to some of the members of the General Assembly to see if that provision can get loosened. And I think if it does, we would be interested in abiding by that. But right now, that's really the restriction that we have regarding how long the tents can be in place and the outside dining can be in place. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I might add, this is Rachel Flynn, Deputy County Executive. We only needed 5 permits for the tents because of the way the board structured it with the square footage on up to 900 square feet. So people were able to get to it, put up their tents, use parking spaces, and except for the one exception that Barbara mentioned, it's gone remarkably well and little to no complaints.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Barbara.
Sure.
Rebecca?
Yep, so next I see Supervisor Gross has her hand up.
Thank you very much. There were 2 items in the early slides that I wanted to comment on. One of the recommendations was to I believe it was to streamline access to information. And in a conversation, community conversation that we were having back in August, that Kaiser Permanente was hosting, it was brought out that many residents, especially in the low-income and diverse communities, don't really have, I guess, what I would call device literacy, and they also don't have the language capabilities that we anticipate people will, will put it all online and they'll log on and it'll be fine because they can get it in all languages. There's a step, at least one step or maybe 2 steps before that, and that is to make sure that people understand what their device can do, or even if they have access to a device. So I wanted to highlight that as an issue that has come up in previous conversations. Technology is great, except that when you don't have access to it or you don't know how to use it, all the things we put on technology doesn't help anybody. The other one was that there was a recommendation to do some efficiencies in the permitting process. Now, I don't know if anybody from Land Development Services is on this, is in this meeting, but this is an ongoing issue that I've heard from a number of folks, usually small businesses or folks who are trying to help a small business, that the permitting process has always been a little challenging, but now that we are in the pandemic, it's even harder. And so I'd like to highlight that as one that we really need to get our arms around, because pandemic or no, the permitting process efficiency sometimes leaves something to be desired. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next, I just read out a couple. We have Supervisor Lusk and Supervisor Harity next.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to say I really appreciate the presentation and the thoughtfulness and the approach that's being taken. I'll say I've got a couple of, I wouldn't say concerns, but thoughts. First, recognizing that in South County, the area that I represent, Lee District, we have some challenges as it relates to the types of companies that are being adversely impacted. And I would say that in the recovery recommendations, we might have to think about some geographic focused recommendations, kind of taking into account that certain areas might be harder hit as it relates to the service-based industry, food, preparation, hospitality. So we've got to really maybe think about having some geographically focused recommendations. This is my first thought. Second, I really like this idea of looking at ways to help retrain, upskill, and really prepare people for available positions. So I think that also should have a tie to areas that are the hardest hit, and thinking about how we can deliver some of those services in the communities that are the most in need, and recognizing that we know which groups in the county have been most adversely impacted, and thinking through how we can serve them through these upskilling, retraining opportunities. And then the last thought I have is we need to really think about how we can position some of these areas for attraction of new technologies and services and businesses. And I think this is going to be something I know Victor Hopkins is going to be thinking about in terms of there's a pivot here that's going to be connected to what's happening with COVID-19. There are going to be new companies that are going to be created as a result of that. And can we get in front and identify what those new technologies, new companies, new areas are of focus? And can we try to attract those here in the Fairfax County? And can we also think about attracting some of those into the areas that have been the hardest hit? And can we look at ways to develop opportunities that will pay higher salaries to the residents in these hardest hit areas? Because let's be honest, what we see when we talk about equitable and inclusiveness is that in these areas, for whatever reason, the salaries are not as high as in, say, the northern part of the county, the western part of the county, because that's where the technology companies are. But we've got to figure out how we can create some more opportunities in these areas where people can move into the middle class and they can support their families and provide for the needs that they have. So those are some of my thoughts here, but I'd really like to be, engaged in kind of some of the follow-up areas here too. And if, and I don't remember seeing that the Board of Supervisors was on this list of people that was being contacted, but I'm going to volunteer. I'm volunteering. I want to be engaged here personally. And I'll say I did work in economic development for 21 years before I came to the board. Not saying I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I've been engaged for a bit and have some thoughts. So would love to help if I can be of assistance. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodney, and you clearly are an expert, whether you will admit it or not. But I wanted to make sure the board knows that on November 10th, HRNA will be coming to us as Economic Initiatives Committee and relying on information they've gathered through a lot of processes, including this one, to make some recommendations. And you're correct, they should be reaching out to speak to the board members, hopefully before that meeting occurs. I think Pat Harity was next. There's Pat.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. And I'm going to start real quickly by echoing a couple of other supervisors, starting with Supervisor Lux. And I do want to be engaged as well. And as a member of the business community, one of the things I'll remind everybody, going into the pandemic, our number one issue is workforce. And I think on our way out of it, once we get through the pandemic, workforce is going to be an issue. So, you're right on, Rodney, with in terms of retraining and getting people ready. Now when they're down is the time that we can focus on that. I think we want to take advantage of that to the extent that we can. And Supervisor Gross, 100% agree. I've had a couple of meetings with Bill Hicks on zoning and permitting. I know they're trying, but we really, when you put something in and it waits for 2 weeks before you get any kind of response, that's just not acceptable. And then you don't know what you really need to do, and it's another 2 weeks, and then it's another 2 weeks. So that's jobs too, because that's people sitting around waiting for permits to be approved before they can hire contractors. So I think we need to do some work there, and I know Bill's trying and staff is trying, but we got a little more to do there. Not in our purview, but I think the number one thing we can do to get our economy going again is to get schools open in-person learning with the appropriate safety protocols, as long as we stay below 5%. And I know that's a school board issue, but that really needs to happen. That's the increase in consumer confidence and our workforce availability that we need. I mean, there are job openings all across the county, but we need the workers need to be able to get there. And that's going to be that's I think the number one thing we can do. The next thing kind of is sports tourism is an opportunity. I think we can help our hospitality industry. We're working on that in the sports tourism task force. We're the board's about to enter into an initial agreement with Alpine X for Fairfax Peak in Lorton. One supervisor indicated that that wouldn't happen unless it's climate neutral. Alpine X, with their European roots, has a long history of environmentally sound green building and environmentally but hard. This is an economic development project that creates over 1,000 jobs and over $1 million a year in tax revenues. That's going to happen right as we come out of this pandemic. And I'd encourage members of the commission to review that and get engaged in that and to weigh in with the board so we can keep that project moving forward. Because I believe it should, and I believe that we're going to be able to do it environmentally soundly. And a final note that on slide 15, all the studies presented there are from jurisdictions that had well below stellar economies pre-COVID-19. I would suggest we look at some studies from some pro-business, strong economic jurisdictions as we move forward to kind of wrap this study up. So those are a few recommendations and a few thoughts, and I'd be happy to bring the group up on the sports tourism issues.
Thank you, Supervisor Hardy. Rebecca, is there anyone with their hand up?
So we have 3 more hands, but I know we have a next section to go to.
Okay, can we do those, and then we'll go quickly through our next presentation then, which is just kind of cumulative, but much more specific about the hospitality industry. And then we'll open it up and questions will all be relevant to everything we've covered. Go ahead.
So the next 3 folks that have their hand raised are Stephen, Denton, and Angie.
Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, hi. This is Stephen Keat, Mount Vernon District. I put this question on chat, but I think it's something important for everyone to hear the answer to. I'd be interested in knowing what are our projections for the impact of the current economic crisis on county revenues. I don't know how far out we're doing this, but next year, next 2 years, next 3 years. And also, looking at things like or bond rating, whether there's any possible impact, and our ability to raise funds in other ways. I'm asking this because there's all sorts of things we want to do, but of course we have to have resources to do this. There was a reference to possible decline in funds coming from the state, but I'm also thinking in terms of what we generate ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Christina Jackson or anyone from Department of Management and Budget on the line? No. We're going to have to respond. I mean, we all have, probably shouldn't be shooting at that target without the experts at this point. They've been evaluating the impacts, and they're going to probably within the next month or so, we're going to start getting feedback on what we need to consider for next year's budget. I think we'll let them prepare a very specific response to your question and circulate it amongst all the members.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question. Who is the next one, Rebecca?
Next we have Denton.
Yes, this question is for the consultants. I'm wondering if they have a handle on the size of the gap in terms of computer availability for community college students, and also whether or not they're aware of any public institutions that are providing technical equipment to potential students, like some of the private colleges, for-profit colleges do.
Rebecca, I'll answer this in 2 ways. The first one, Supervisor, is that we don't have the direct data on the number of students who do not have access, or the percentage of students that do not have access. We could probably follow up with GMU or NOVA on sort of what they see that number is, but they expressed that that was something that they're finding with their students, but we don't have that exact number. And maybe we can look into that, or at least see what the percentages are nationally that could lend at least some guidance to what that sort of digital divide on that front is. But to your second question, yes, there are public institutions, school districts, universities, and others who are bridging that gap through initiatives of their own. And in fact, we talked a bit about that with GMU and NOVA about what some other universities and other institutions are doing. A client of ours, the Dallas Independent School District in Dallas, Texas, is actually providing both Wi-Fi, distributing Wi-Fi, and devices. There are others who are doing things like that. Some are and some aren't, but it is something that is being done and is a possibility if folks wanted to go in that direction. And Olivia, probably in the section of our report where we talk about these sorts of things, we can reference some examples of what's being done by public institutions or by other public government agencies in the country.
Okay. And the final question before we go to the next presentation, Rebecca?
Angie, yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to hear if there has been discussion as far as the K recovery and how we can be proactive in kind of retraining and intersecting those two different K participants. For instance, instead of for gifting, instead of going to Amazon or Costco for pumpkin pie, who are the local small shops and bakers without SEO. Local contractors and home repair versus Home Depot. So if we go to our easiest choice, we're going to the big box stores. But I think a lot of our local consumers that are still spending would prefer to go to a lot of local neighbors and residents, but they're not being found on SEO. So how can we help?
Jeff, is that something that you're looking at and can offer some guidance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets to of course, it's how should I say this? As you look at Fairfax County and sort of your economic mix and your employers, how do you support your employers? I would say you would counsel that you would need to start there. However, what we are seeing across the country, and we can look at examples of this, particularly because of the hit, and you can see it numerically in our slides, that small businesses are taking a disproportionate share of the hit. Many communities are thinking about sort of support small business campaigns and those sorts of things that are not, how should I say, exclusive of other retailers in your community, but with a highlight that these are the businesses that are suffering the most and you need to pay some attention to them. So as a part of that economic confidence and that sort of thing, communities are supporting small business. But as a county and looking at your tax base, you don't want to alienate your entire portfolio of your business community. So it's sort of a balance, but yes, that is something that is happening and we can take a look at that.
Thank you. We're going to move to the next set of presentations. It's kind of a subset of what we've been covering, but we thought would be important for everyone to get a sense and an appreciation for how severely impacted the hospitality sector has been. No sector of our economy has been hurt more by the unprecedented changes needed to respond to the virus than the hospitality sector. And for a variety of reasons, that industry, including hotels, restaurants, and tourism, is vital to our local economy, but also to the quality of life in Fairfax County. So we have separate presentations from two longtime members of the EAC, Mark Carrier, who is president of the B.F. Saul Company's Hospitality Group, and Barry Bigger, who is president and CEO of Visit Fairfax. We were going to have a brief presentation by Barbara Byron on the efforts we've made on behalf of the restaurant industry from a zoning standpoint, but she's already covered that, and I think there's probably a sense we want to get back to asking some more questions and discussing things a little more. So we'll take those two presentations. Mark's is a video, which we have captioned because the audio is not perfect, but he got called away to a very important business meeting, was kind enough to make this video for us. So Rebecca, can we roll the cameras?
Yep, I think we're going to bring it up. And as Supervisor Faust mentioned, the audio is really difficult, so we have the captions, and I'll also put the link in the chat, which can take you directly to the video if that's a little bit easier to hear.
And I will just jump in and say that the captions are not perfect either, but you will get certainly the full gist of everything. There are just a few words that you might think are weird, but anyway, here we go.
Good morning. I'm Mark Carrier, President of the BFSOL Company Hospitality Group. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to address fellow members of the Economic Advisory Commission regarding the status and impact of the pandemic on the hospitality industry. I thank Supervisor Faust for his invitation and all the members of the Commission for their focus on supporting Fairfax. I'd be with you live, but a business priority has intervened. I'm addressing you from the lobby of our DoubleTree Hotel in Tyson's Corner. Tyson's. We, as have many hoteliers, have been extremely diligent in implementing safety protocols for the protection of our guests and team members. In fact, I just got my temperature checked and am in the safe range. The BFSOL company has been in business in this region since 1892, 128 years. And I'm a proud member of the Fairfax County community, having lived here with my wife Cheryl since 1982. The hotel business is a unique combination of an operating business and a real estate investment. The fixed costs of the industry and individual hotels are very high, very significant. It includes payroll and benefits, utilities, maintenance, real estate taxes, all of the things that come together to bring a hotel to life. The majority of hotels are owned by individual investors that have dedicated tremendous personal equity to the industry. There are major organizations that make Fairfax home, such as Hilton and Park Hotels and Resorts. They play an important role in the industry, of course, as well. The pandemic has created an existential crisis for our industry, not unlike the restaurant industry as well. As the pandemic hit in March, travel throughout the United States, and indeed the world, slowed to a very low level, a level never seen before in our industry. Hotels generate their business here in Fairfax through three components, which include business travel, government travel, and leisure. And all three elements, all three pillars of our business declined simultaneously. Each of these components have been severely impacted. I've shared with you a report which highlights the status of the industry after 6 months of the pandemic. This was authored by the American Hotel Lodging Association, our National Trade Association. There's 3 points in this report that I'd like to emphasize. The first is people. 4 out of 10 hotel workers around our country are now not working. In our own company here in this region, 6 out of 10 people are not working. And that affects all levels, from management to sales to accounting to our dear line team members that serve our guests. This has perhaps been the most heart-rending experience in my entire career. And up until March of this year, we as an organization had never laid off one hotel team member in the whole duration of our hotel investments, which is more than 40 years. 2/3 of hotels around the country are below 50% occupancy. This is below the level, far below the level that can service fixed costs, including debt service. So many hotels are paying to stay open because the break-even point is far above where our levels are. In Fairfax, all hotels combined for the last 3 months did an occupancy of just 32%. 32% of rooms. That's less than half the occupancy of the a year ago. In fact, the occupancy in 2019 for that same period was 76%. So compare 32 to 76, it's a different world. Our revenue over the past 3 months has declined by 73% across the entire county. That represents thousands of jobs and critical retail tax payments. It's a huge impact. Cash flow for the industry has evaporated, basically. Hotel owners and operators are well below the break-even point, and they're individually fighting to sustain their investments in their businesses. It's a critical time. Frankly, the sustained nature of the crisis has created tremendous financial stress throughout everybody in the industry. Now, I believe there's 4 specific areas that the county can focus on in support of our industry. It first begins with supporting policies that enable our employers to return to work, to get our business centers like Tyson's back up and working. That makes the difference for hotel occupancy. In fact, we know there's lots of policies that go into that. This is a worldwide issue. However, there are many that the county can focus on to make a difference. Educational policy is an example of that. We need our county officials and everybody to advocate with our elected officials in Washington for programs that sustain our industry. Our county has great relationships with our representatives in Congress as well as our senators. Let them know how important our industry is. Support Visit Fairfax, that's number 3. This promotional organization is first rate. It's got great leadership in Barry Bigger, a fantastic staff, and their funding should be supported through this crisis, in fact, increased to assist in bringing our industry back to life. And then the 4th item is to be careful about regulatory issues and burdens. Be flexible with your hoteliers and your service industries throughout the county. Be aware of how much our values have been damaged by this pandemic. Reflect that in the real estate assessment process and be mindful of how much value owners of hotels and owners of businesses have lost in this pandemic crisis. Now, I, like many others, have committed my professional life in equity to this industry. We're in a survival challenge today, but I do look forward to a future that will grow and sustain. Fairfax County is known for that. We adapt, we change, we succeed, and I know that that will happen again in the future. My dear colleague Barry Bigger is following me here and will provide some more context. Our company vice president of operations, Herb Gross, is also available for questions. I thank you again for your support and appreciate everything you're doing for the county.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me, Chase? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Apologize for the difficulty in hearing that, but the message was from the heart and from a man who knows who loves the hotel industry and had some really insightful suggestions for us to consider. And fortunately, Mark being Mark, he gave us a written copy of his comments in advance, so we will circulate those so that everybody, if you did have difficulty following along, you'll get to see and hear what Mark is suggesting, and in particular the 4 recommendations he has of how we can work to help restore the industry that he loves. Now I'm going to turn to Barry Bigger, who's president and CEO of Visit Fairfax. And Barry, you could quickly go through your presentation, and then we'll have some more comments and questions.
Great. Well, a very good morning, Chairman Faust, members of the Board of Supervisors, and all of my colleagues on the EAC. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the hospitality industry and the impact that this pandemic has had and continues to have. Today, my comments are really going to be around the hotels and the effects that this pandemic has had on that part of the community. However, we do also need to remember that the hospitality industry certainly also includes restaurants, attractions, the air travel, retail, arts, culture, and so many other parts of the overall that have really been impacted. But before I get going, I do want to thank the county very much, certainly for the RISE program. That has assisted so many people in the restaurant part of it, as well as the hotel. So thank you. And also the ability that you have provided so many to actually pivot and continue to do business through like outdoor dining. So thank you. Next slide, please. There are really two very major variables that impact the overall economics of the hotel industry. One is occupancy, the other is rates charged. So let's begin with occupancy. If you could hit the progression one more time, Chase, there we go. So the current chart that you see really highlights the significant devastation in the occupancy year over year, beginning in January. I'm really happy to tell you that 2019 was actually a record year for tourism here in our county. The tourism industry collectively contributed $3.5 billion to the county. And 2020 was well on its way to actually even surpassing that. But as you can see, both January and February, we were actually ahead of our 2019 occupancies. March hit, and half of the month is what this really reflects. The month of March was 71% occupied rooms in 2019. In 2020, that fell to 38%. The very worst month of all of these last 7 was indeed the month of April. 2019, we had an 80% occupancy. 2020, that went down to 19%. So we began to see a slow rebound with August, considerably lower than 2019, but better than we have seen in this year. 2019, we had a percent of occupancy in 72%. 2020, 36%. If we could go to the next slide. The other part that really contributes to the overall hospitality or hotel business is indeed the rates charged. Now, as you can see from this particular chart, the revenue per month that hotels generated, and this is only reflective of rooms. So it does not include food and beverage, catering, meeting revenue, or any other profit center in hotels. And what you're seeing here is actually conservative. So if you consider the overall loss that the hotels have had since March to now, we're talking about a cumulative figure of $279 million lost from March to August. And again, that is only the rooms. If we could go to the next slide. So how has it impacted the county? Well, between March and August, just in the tourism occupancy tax collection, and that is the 6% tax that is added on to the room rental, the county has lost $17 million in just the occupancy tax. That does not include sales tax, nor payroll tax, as well as many other taxes that this particular part of our industry contributes. So it's quite substantial. We have to remember we're about to go into fall and winter, which is traditionally the lowest period of occupancy for our hotels. So this particular tax loss to the county is just going to continue to grow. If we could go into the next slide. So Visit Fairfax has really begun to work on a three-phase strategy of building back tourism here in the county. The first part was to support everything here in the county as the virus unfolded. So we really stopped marketing outside the county to bring visitors in and really dedicated a lot of our resource to supporting the community here. The next phase will really be to inspire people to consider traveling in the future. And the third part will be when people are comfortable to travel, when our message will really begin to increase. So, consumer confidence is absolutely critical. And if you look at this particular chart, and this particular company destination analysts do this every week. But just look at the statement. How much do you agree? I'm planning to avoid all travel until the coronavirus situation blows over. 53% of the consumer have said, I totally agree, or I strongly agree. So there is a huge percentage of travelers who don't want to travel at this particular time and won't until we're done. Next slide, please. Now look at this, perceived safety of travel activities. At this moment, how safe would you feel doing each type of travel activity? Well, if you look at the percentage of people who are actually saying we consider it very unsafe, the majority of our traveling public is saying, I'm not traveling and I'm not comfortable and I don't feel safe. The good news, however, is if you look at dining in restaurants, that is now beginning to tick up in the activity that people feel safe doing. Next slide, if we could. Now, confidence in traveling safely in the current environment. There you go again. We're at 31% of the traveling public saying yes, I am, but the majority, 44%, saying no, not at all. To build back our industry, this needs to change. So if we go to the next slide, look at business travel. Which month do you anticipate your company or organization will begin traveling for business again? The majority, certainly not until 2021, and certainly not until mid-2021. These have to change in order for us to begin rebuilding the economy. So what happens when this changes? There are many travel segments we here in Visit Fairfax market to and bring in. Leisure travel, number one, individuals. That is indeed beginning to pick up, and it is really the first segment that has shown any growth at all. The group travel, which is really motor coach, domestic, we will potentially see a partial return of them coming here in spring of next year. The international travel, group and individual, is really going to be very dependent on when the airlines pick up again. But really, no one is looking at that as coming back until the summer of next year or beyond. Student youth travel, if you notice, particularly around the spring of the year, there are literally thousands of motor coaches who come here with students who are coming to our nation's capital. We see a very great deal of them overnighting here in Fairfax County. That market, not even thinking about coming back until 2022. Sports tourism, which Supervisor Harity had mentioned, that is actually to this very day currently taking place. But it is totally dependent on facility regulations and destination-specific restrictions. We usually have a very large soccer tournament held here every fall that brings in some 220 plus teams. We recently lost that to Richmond because Richmond's facilities are welcoming them and they're open. We now hope we don't lose that tournament permanently. The corporate transient, it could begin to pick up late spring, but most forecasts are actually telling us late 2021 or early 2022. A great deal of the smaller corporate market is actually right now becoming very comfortable with virtual meetings like we're doing now. So that could even take longer to come back. Next slide. Convention conference, let's look at DC. They have already had every single major conference of which they had booked for the first half of 2021, now moving to 2022 and beyond. So that's a little worrisome. Government travel, really depending on restrictions being lifted, we're looking at possibly early to mid 2021. At the end of the day, as I said, all travel in tourism is really at this point predicated on consumer confidence and access. We're probably not going to see our industry rebound pre-COVID until the earliest 2023.
I say, thank you, Barry. That was certainly eye-opening, and what a challenge we have. We are, at a point where the meeting could terminate. I thought since no one's waiting to get in the room as normal, we could go a couple more minutes. If there are questions that people really want to get answered today, if not, we would ask any suggestions, recommendations, questions you want to submit to Rebecca Maudry, who has, I think, put her email address up on the chat. Going forward, this is an ongoing process. Hopefully you'll be thinking about these issues, and we will hear from you going forward. It's a big challenge, and we all need to work together to meet, to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So are there, Rebecca, are there any hands up?
Yep, I see Supervisor Stork has his hand up.
Oh, good. Dan?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Barry, thank you very much for your summary of where we are. It's devastating and it's real. You add that to the consultant's presentation about what happens in some of these areas where the unemployment rates are obviously much higher than usual. So you have these individual segments of the population, individual segments of our county, geographic harm is more significant than other things. So it's really the home of tourism, if you will, in Fairfax County is the Richmond Highway Corridor, the Mount Vernon District in particular. We've done a number of things, and Barry has been very involved with bringing in consultants and working with our community to try to focus on what we can do, not what woe is me, what we can't do. So right now, the core of that is how do we increase the number of folks who are going to travel local? If you will, the hyper-local travel, the hyper-local focus is what the Tourism Task Force that I started, and that's part of the Mount Vernon community. That's truly what we focused on, is how do we get those folks to stay here? We have a hyper-local focus and a hyper-fast packaging for South County. Barry, can you talk about that just at least briefly, some of the things that we've done, and try to at least make folks aware of why it matters?
Sure. Really the day where we need to market and concentrate all of our efforts really is very close in regional markets, within a 50 to 100 mile radius. The easiest way to get people to travel here to our area is to make it very simple and package those attractions, those experiences, of which we have plenty of here in the county, that the traveler is looking for. Weekend travel, being all outdoor activity. If you look at Occoquan Park, if you look at several of the areas in South County, they really have such an abundance of outdoor tourism assets. So we are packaging them, we're promoting them, and we're really reaching out to those markets within, even a 2 or 3 hour driving radius in order to boost that up. So we also have some amazing things that are going to be opening. The National Army Museum, and that hopefully, according to the press release today, will open in November. So we're doing a lot, particularly in South County, because the assets we have are what is very appealing to the traveling public now. Safe, outdoors, and still exciting, and a wonderful experience, memory to take home.
Excellent.
Thank you, Barry. And I would just echo that. And Mount Vernon Estate has had a number of things it's done, again, to kind of provide people with a safe opportunity to travel. So thank you.
Rebecca?
I don't see any other hands up.
Okay. Well, we've gone a little bit over and we haven't gotten to the autonomous vehicle, but you do have, it was just going to be an update, no action or anything we need from the commission at this point. So you have that handout, and hopefully if you have any questions after reviewing it, you'll contact one of us. But I want to say thank you for to our presenters and to the staff who helped put this virtual meeting together. And thank you to all the members of the EAC for your excellent participation, your questions. We've captured the questions, we've captured the comments, and we appreciate everything. And really feel free at any time going forward to suggest whatever thoughts you have. We need to all work together to solve this problem. So with that, unless there's anything else to come before the commission, we will adjourn our meeting. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.